Good morning. We are reviewing the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, and we are at the bottom of page 1404, discussing the relationship between Torah, Neshamas, and Torah, and understanding that they are both mashpia into each other. So there are times where the Torah is mashpia into Yisrael, and they are the makabel, Yisrael miskashrim baraisa. That's the way the neshamas come down below, where they are concealed and covered up by the body and animal soul and subject to its effects. So the neshamas turn to Torah to help free them, to free the soul, so to speak, to reveal what God wants of us through the Torah. So Yisrael miskashrin bind themselves to Torah, and Torah through Torah they bind themselves to HaKadosh Baruch. So l'gabe madrega zu the neshama haTorah hilamayla mi Yisrael, and that level of neshama, the Torah is higher than Yisrael, and it's through Torah that we're mamshech elikus in these worlds, like it says halichas elam loy, and he explained halichas elam loy. Halicha is a journey. And it's a journey that is an interface, both from the top down and from the bottom up. Beis halichos, momata lamayla or momayla lamata. So elsewhere, and the truth is, earlier in Ayin Beis, he explained the momata lamayla is through tefillah. It says, ulefia mavur nira, according to the explanation we're learning here, that gam momata lamayla hu idea Torah. So it's in addition to tefillah. Also, Torah has an element of momata l'mayla, which is what? That Yisrael are binding themselves to Torah. That's from the bottom up. The neshamas come down below, and then they connect to Torah, and through Torah to Kutshibrichu. And you have to say, this is kashrus is even higher than the one that tefillah accomplishes, as I explained more at length yesterday in the previous class. By Deizen nimshach ha'aras ein sof. And through this, Ein Sof is transmitted the level of Kutshibrichu into the world. So it's Yisrael connecting to Torah, Torah to Kutshibrichu, drawing down Elikus into the world. The Torah is the Mamutza, L'chaber or L'hamshech Ein Sof Be'elam, the interface to join together, to connect, and to draw down Ein Sof into existence. And he brought now the pasuk, the last thing we learned, which we're in the middle of, is Oita Kesalmo. Like it says, Oita he wraps himself with light like a shirt, like a garment, which refers to Torah, that's called the garment, because that's the garment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through which he manifests within. He clothes himself with Vusha Torah, and through that Ein Sof, is Nimshach into the world. So essentially, this is Torah is God's garment. Garment because it expresses his wisdom, his will, his whole being is invested in it. So that's where we're up to the last few lines, 5 lines from the bottom of page 1404. And we'll continue now learning inside. It says, B'inyan salma. What are these two things? On one hand, it's called light, but then he wraps himself in light like a garment. What is the two levels of and Salmo? So he says like this. Every mamutza is an interface. Interface by definition means it's interfacing between two entities. In this case, Ein Sof and Elamus. So the Torah on one hand is being mamshech Ein Sof, but it's drawing it down into the worlds, obviously through neshamas. The Shamas Yisrael that come down below. So he's saying that and Salma are the two levels of this Mamutza. He's going to explain the difference between them. Bechinas the Torah, and here we see again the central theme that we began on page 1350, Torah. Remember we said Torah is Torah. There it just says light. Here he's spelling out more how it actually, the process of how that light becomes something that can manifest and be transmitted into existence. So he says, "Bechinas the Torah zeu masha klula mebechinas Ein Sof habilti bal gvul ubilti bal tachlis." When we say of Torah, Torah is we're referring to which is mashaklula, that it's encompassed of what? Of Ein Sof, without limits and without end, without any parameters. So in other words, we're talking about the infinite of the divine, the sheer magnitude and infinity of Elikus, not as Elikus manifests within a structure. So you see now that Torah is what I referred to before, Atzmi. It's essentially expressing all of godliness in the most expansive form. That's what Torah is, the part. Salma, and the level of the garment, the shirt, which is what we call already the garment of Torah. That's how Torah serves as a garment. That's the second part. That's the root and source of Gvul. Because if the Torah only remained Ein Sof, Bilti Bal Gvul and Bilti Bal Tachlis, then it remains a divine entity, like Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, and does not have a relationship with existence. It's beyond existence. So the Eibishter made that the Torah should also manifest in a garment. And that garment refers to the root and the source of Gvul, of structure of existence. It's not existence, but it relates to existence. Shahari kol dine halachas the Torah. So now, the first part in Torah is the pure elikus in it, the unbridled and unlimited godliness. But the second part is when you look in Torah, you say kol dine halachas Torah the Torah, kol dine halachas the Torah. All the laws of Torah, hey mugbalim, are all defined. The Torah speaks about very specific guidelines. Elu trefus, the elu kashrus. These are the things that are treif, that are not kosher. These are the things that are kosher. These are very specific items. They're not just bli gvul and bli tachlis. They talk about specific things, behaviors, or foods, or other things that are either non-kosher or kosher. So here you see in Torah an element that completely relates to existence. It's telling us when is Shabbos, when is weekdays, what is Yom Kippur, what are the specific laws that you do in each of these times. Just using my own examples here. But he just used Elikash and Sel Tov, it's just an example. But on the other hand, Ube'emes, in truth, Aruchem Eretz Midah V'Rechava Min Yam. The Pasuk says about Torah that it's longer than any ocean. It's longer than Aruchem Eretz Midah. It's longer than any measurement of land, and more expansive than any ocean. That means it's referring to something that is unlimited. So on one hand, we see that. On the other hand, the Torah does relate to measure and structure. So in the parentheses, he tells us something we learned earlier, if you may recall, Shagama Medida the Torah, because in truth, even that which is the measurements of Torah, even the parameters of Torah, he bebchinas bilti midah, is really without measurement. I'll explain in a moment. The commotion is bar lil, as we learned earlier. You may recall he compared it to a makam ha'aron eina min amida. Also in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, he discussed it relatively at length. That Torah is really, even though it's a measure, tells us, like he said, this is kosher, this is not. But there's two types of measure. There's a measure that's real gvul. Like for example, this table here that I'm sitting by, or just us human beings, we are real parameters. The midas of Torah are really God's bligvul that's simply manifesting in a midah. So it's really considered to be built in midah and midah at once. Even though it does relate to definition, but it's a definition that comes from a place that has no definition. So basically, God's lack of definition or transcendence of, or beyond being definition, that itself is, the definition is part of that. In Ayin Beis in volume 1, he spoke relatively at length that the hagvul, the of Ein Sof, the hagvul is just a piece of habligvul. It's God's infinite power, includes his ability to manifest in a finite state. So we say, for example, in the Esses Sviras Agnuzes before the Tzimtzum, he said Chachma there is just a piece of a Blikvul entity, and you're only getting the Chachma part. So it's not really defined. It's a definition that's part of a bigger, it's a Gvul that's part of a Blikvul. So really it's like Blikvul being packaged and so-called concentrated into this specific detail. It ultimately will be the root of real Gvul, the Gvul of this world that has actual parameters. But essentially, all the midas of Torah, all the measurements are really a form of what he calls, the Torah is a form of bilti midah. So just to use an example, if a person, for instance, chooses by his own volition, not by imposition, to sit and in one place and learn Torah for the next 6 hours, and he's not budging from his place, so someone could say, oh, you know what? He's stuck. Or you could say, no, he chose to now take all his whole being and his whole energy and investing it in this particular thing. That doesn't mean he's stuck. It doesn't mean he's defined by it. It means he chose to define himself by it. Now, that's even on a human level. How much more so with God? Now, I don't remember what page he said this earlier, but I do remember that we learned it in Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. I'd have to look where it was. Where's the commotion is boiling ill? But the point is, that's not so much what he wants to emphasize here. That's why it's a parenthesis. Here he wants to speak about that Torah has both elements. On one hand, Torah is the infinite capacity of Torah, and then the Salma, Salma, he took that and manifested like a garment that it should relate to Midah, the measurements, which are all the Dinei Halachas HaTorah, like he just said. In truth, they're all part of one reality, one Blikvul, like he said. But the Midah itself is B'chinas Bilti Midah. But that is not the main thing he wants to emphasize, how they join together. He wants to point out that it has both elements. So what you see from this is that the Torah is a mamutzef. It's a interface and between both realities. So if the Torah just remained completely abstract and didn't have any discussion of measurement or anything that's within the parameters of existence, then it wouldn't be a mamutzah. Then the Torah just represents a lakus. But here it's a lakus as it relates to existence. That's the key thing that we need to keep in mind. So now he's going to go back to, obviously, Yisrael Miskashroin, that when we now bind ourselves to Torah, that's how we bind ourselves to God, and that brings godliness into the parameters of existence. But let me just stop if anybody wants to clarify or ask anything about what I just explained. All clear? Okay. So continuing along on top of page 1405, V'zeu Yisrael miskashroyin ba'araisa. This is the meaning that Yisrael, which means the souls as they come down below, bind themselves ba'araisa in Torah, shaneshama melubeshes beguf, that the soul which manifests and is enclosed in the body. Interesting, he uses the melubeshes like a levush as well. Shehi b'chinas nivra u'bal gvul. The body is a nivra and a bal gvul, like we said, ata, and the neshama comes down to that level, ata barosa, ata yitzarta. So neshama is manifesting in a state of nivra and bal gvul. That's the defined parameters of existence. Ukedesha tischaber. La'ein sofa bilti bal gvul. And in order for this neshama and the guf, and the bal, in the finite body, and the neshama as it manifests in a finite state, for it to connect to Ein Sof, to the infinite, bilti bal gvul, shezeh b'chinas kudshe brichu, that refers to the level of godliness of God. Zeu ha'idei Torah. That's a raisa. That's Yisrael iskashroim ba'raisa, and a raisa b'kudshe brichu. Yisrael, as the neshama is down below in a finite state, connects to Torah, which has both elements, and through that to the Ein Sof HaBligvul of Kudshe Brichu. That's through Torah. Sheyesh bo beis habchinas, the Eir v'Salma, and the Torah has both levels Oir habligvul, and Salma Oir hagvul, Shem Beis B'chinas Sheba Mamutza. Those are the two levels of this interface. So that's the process, very specifically spelled out in very clear terms what exactly Torah's role is in this context. And as we said before, it has an element of Mamata Lamaila and Mamayla Lamata. Va'af Gam Da'guva Nefesh Habamis Ma'limim Mastilim Al Eren Neshama. Well, what do we do now? How do we contend with the concealment of the body and the animal soul? This explains how you bridge the finite with the infinite. But we have another issue here. The body and animal soul also conceal the divine. They have their own interests. Interests of their own survival, self-interest. So it's more than just, okay, you showed me now how to bridge the two. What do you deal with that concealment? How does the Torah help us deal with the body and animal souls? Like we discussed yesterday, what he says in Amagbil L'Sheves in the Maimer Torah and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. What did he say there? That the animal soul has its own interests. The interest to want to survive, to deal with its own needs and its own impulses and its own desires and temptations. What do you do with all of that? So it's not just, as I said, Gvul and Bli Gvul, bridging the two. So he says here too the Torah has a specific power. It says, "Av gam da guva nefesh malim mastirim al er neshama yesh b'keach haTorah." There's the power. There's within the power of Torah, lishbeid es hahester da nefesh habamis, to break open, in other words, to tame, if you wish, that concealment, that covering of the animal soul, and to draw it out from the prison that it is trapped in. In other words, the neshama is sometimes referred to as being imprisoned in the body and the animal soul. And the Torah helps the neshama free itself from that prison. So it's more than just allowing the neshama to elevate to a state of Bli Gvul, but it also is to get it out of the prison. Shezeh inyan oiz v'teshia. We say that Torah is oiz v'teshia. So oiz means strength, teshia means like salvation, Yeshua. Also, Torah, hibchinas oiz l'nefesh halikis, it gives power to the divine soul. Umateshes, and the word teshia he's using here to weaken. Mateshes, it weakens and tame the keach hanefesh habamis, the power of the animal soul. And he brings a different mimer in Torah in Yisrei, but Dibra Maskul b'chedesh hashlishi, in the mimer b'chedesh hashlishi. So what you see here is that two things that Torah does. Besides what he said before, the mamutza between Bli Gvul and the Gvul, and Salma, the Torah also has the power, it empowers a divine soul and weakens the animal soul. And this is all through the power of the light of Torah. That's the power of Torah. That the light of Torah has this power. So we see here how Torah plays such a key role, and the neshama needs the Torah for all this. So in other words, the neshama is being makabel, all this from the Torah. So according to this, Torah is higher than the neshama. Let me stop again if anybody wants to ask anything before I continue. Okay.
This is a very, very late question. Real quick, Bilti Bal Tachlis on the prior page. What is Bal Tachlis?
Gvul means limit, and Tachlis means structure, could be parameters. It has different meanings in different places.
Tachlis is like the bottom or the end, or it's without.
Sometimes it's the chol tichla yesh, the chol tichla re'isi kates. Tachlis could also mean purpose. but basically it's definition. I would say gvul, finite and definition. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
That doesn't have any limit and doesn't have any definition.
Thank
you. Yeah. So continuing on here, like it says elsewhere, that Torah liyas sharsham b'pchinas akudim. Torah, being that is rooted in the level of akudim, ub'chinas chochma gduma da'ak, and the primordial level of chochma of adam kadman. So obviously Torah is rooted even higher than that, but in the where he's talking now, it's in the kudim and chochma gduma da'ak shalamayla b'pchinas toyu v'tikun. That's higher than the levels of toyu and tikun, which are lower than akudim. Since that's why it has the power to break down and to, you could say, I don't want to say the word dissolve is not the right word here, but lishber means to break the shell, if you wish, like crack open the shell or of the animal soul. Because the nefesh habamis is rooted in toihu. And Torah is rooted higher in akudim and in machshava gduma of ak. Now, keep in mind, even though we've been talking that the neshamas are rooted in Torah, that first of all, the neshama as it's higher than Torah, and on Torah himself, he said is either ak, what he said earlier, he said was the level of ak tehiri Allah, or the Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. So the point being is that we'll find throughout different places that Torah manifests throughout Ishtalshlus. Sometimes Torah associates with Chachma Vatzilus and mitzvahs with Ratzon. Sometimes Torah is Chachma Stima and mitzvahs are Galgalta, the skull. So these are not contradictions, just simply talking about Torah in different states of a Seder Ishtalshlus. So he's quoting that in one place it says, Mokamachi explains, that being that Torah is rooted in akudim and shava gduma da'ak, or shachachma gduma da'ak, which is higher tikkun, that's why it has the power to tame or to break the chumrius, the crassness or the coarseness of the animal soul. U'kamesha Amar Razal, like Razal tell us, al posik al ginas ogus. This is called the Ginas Ogus, the garden, the nut garden. Ogus is a nut, and Gina is like Gan. So Ginas Ogus is a pasuk in Shir Shirim and a few other places, I think. So he says there that Razal say on the pasuk El Ginas Ogus, the Luchis Evan Shevinus Anefesh Abamis. That the Luchis Evan, the tablets of stone, which were the Luchis given by Matan Torah, they break the animal soul, and essentially the animal soul is like the ogus, the nut, which needs to be cracked open. Within it is trapped the neshama down below, like he said, like a prison. So what breaks it open is you take a stone, that's how you crack a nut. You take a stone, what is the stone? The stone is referring to Evan, Luchis Evan of the Torah. So point being is that Torah has the power that's stronger than what the neshama is trapped within the guf and nefesh habamis, to break it open and to tame and to weaken the power of the animal soul's control over the nefesh halikis down below when it manifests within the soul, manifests within the guf and nefesh habamis. V'l'chein Amar Razal b'psichta de'echa, and that's why Razal say there's a medrash. Psichta de'echa means echa rabba. There's a psichta, there's a introduction. So he's citing an introduction to Eicha Rabbah, basically. So he says there, Halavai Eisi Azevu v'teirose Shamru. He says there that Halavai, may it be, Eisi, God says, forsake me, but protect but you should preserve the Torah. Hamoyesh ba machzir l'mutav. Because the Torah, the moyer within the Torah, the luminary within the Torah will draw you back to good. So what he's saying there, obviously God is not saying forsake me as God, but I trust that even if you forsake me, if you follow the Torah, you will ultimately return to me. Because the Torah has the power to deal with the concealments of the Nefesh Habamis and ultimately return the Neshama to Lemutov, to the good path, so to speak, to the right path. Moyer Sheba hu b'chinas de Torah. We say Moyer Sheba. That's referring to the luminary within Torah. That's the that's the power of Torah. Not just like light, it's like the source of light. Sheyesh b'keich ha-Torah lishber as ha-nefesh habamis, because the Torah has the power to break down the animal soul, ulekasha neshama shebaguf, and going back to the first point, and to bind the soul within the body, to the level of the infinite divine light, the level of Kudsha Brichu. The Yisrael connects to Torah and Torah to Kudsha Brichu, and that has that power. So we see from all of this is when the Shama comes down below, how much it needs Torah to achieve, to elevate and connect to God. That's referring to the level of Neshama as is below. So based on that, Torah is higher than the Neshama, because the Neshama is Mekabel from Torah and receives the power of Torah to be able to connect to the divine, infinite, as well as to break down the animal soul's resistance and concealment. That's level one. Okay. Any questions?
It seems like this process, I mean, he's getting into the actual innards of what it means to transform the Nefesh Bahamas. And my question is, it's somewhat related to the idea of Hisabcha. And I'm wondering if that's correct, because typically we think of Hisabcha as this Iskasti and Hisabcha as something that one does for oneself. It's an act of self-will to subdue Nefesh Bahamas and the Yetzer Hara and to transform it. But so my question is it related to Hisabcha, or is it a different, I don't know, concept or mechanism?
So first of all, he's not going into the two levels of Iskafi and Hisabcha here. He's just talking about weakening the animal soul. He's not talking about whether subduing it or transforming it. That will be discussed later when we get back to Ner Mitzvah and the Maimer HaMagbil L'Sheves. It's basically what we learned from what we've said a number of times. Neshama only has that much power on its own. There's a reason we were given Torah and mitzvahs. Because if the Neshama doesn't need Torah and mitzvahs to contend with the animal soul, then why do we have Torah and mitzvahs? Even with Torah and mitzvahs, look how difficult it is, right? So Torah is giving the Neshama power to do that Iskafi and Hisabcha. That's what he's saying here.
Okay.
You're asking, can the Neshama do something without Torah at all? To a certain limited extent, yes, and we will learn about it. We actually learned about it in Torah when Shema Yisrael, that his bonus, the contemplation of the soul in the Achdus Hashem, the unity of God, can transform the animal soul, but it's only a limited fashion. And even that is also, Shema Yisrael also comes from Torah. And also that Achdus, that contemplation is also Torah-dic based. But yes, the Neshama has a certain extent power. Like I mentioned, for example, even without Torah, we could come up intelligently with certain moral and ethical laws, but it's a very limited way. And even when you do that, you still have a Nefesh Habamis that's raging and very powerful. And like I said, even with Torah, look how difficult it is to contend with the animal soul. So here he's talking about how Torah empowers the soul to be able to deal with the animal soul and break it down.
So Torah is a tool for his copy and his Hisabcha. Yes?
I don't know if I would use that word. I would just say the power to tame and weaken the animal soul. Torah gives that power. That's what he just said.
Tame and weaken, but not transform. That's the question.
I didn't say that.
I know. Oh,
he doesn't discuss here transform or weaken. The difference. He doesn't talk about the levels. He just talks about Torah gives the power to weaken. Ultimately, it's to transform as well, but he doesn't speak about that here. We'll talk about that later.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I have a question. concerning the implementation.
Just keep in mind, one more second. Just keep in mind, this is a general rule. Does a soul need Torah and mitzvahs to achieve its purpose in this world? Just ask that question. The answer is yes, it does. Because the neshama, with all its divine power, it gets concealed. That's the whole point here. It's concealed and it's limited. So it's like saying, can a person achieve great heights without education? Yeah, you could be a genius and a prodigy, and if you're never educated, you probably can come up with some things, but obviously education is going to be quite critical, because the biggest Talmid Chacham with education is going to be greater than without education, without a teacher. Can a student reach the highest levels without a teacher? So hypothetically, you could reach levels, but the teacher obviously is, besides being a shortcut, it's also empowering and trains you in the proper way of becoming the proper student.
That's a great mashal.
Just as some examples.
Yeah.
I came across during my practicing to the point when you said the Torah is a remedy for Nefesh Bahamas to be improved. Yes, if it is a remedy.
Here he says to weaken it, to weaken its hold. Remember, the animal soul is focused on its own needs, and that has a hold on us. Just look into our own, just look at ourselves. It's not theoretical. Every moment of our lives, we have to deal with an animal soul that is about ego, about self-interest, and so on. And the Torah helps the divine soul to contend with that, to weaken that hold. That's the way I would put it.
What kind of implementation we have to use Torah with? Implementation, I mean, for example, when the Torah is taken from the ark and people rush to kiss it, is that level where the Torah start to influence Nefesh Bahamas? When the Torah is open and they start to read it, is that the level?
I understand your question. I got the question. I would say the following. Everything in Judaism can be done in a very shallow, superficial, and what Chassidus would call makivdika way. You know, when you kiss a Torah, it's a beautiful act, but it doesn't take much avodah, doesn't take much work. When a person studies Torah, for example, and they break their head to try to understand what it says in Ayin Beis, or in the written Torah, or in the Talmud, then they're working at it, and the Torah is affecting their very personality. The ultimate goal is for us to think like God thinks, not like we think. The animal soul, as we learned in the Maimer HaMagbil Sheves, the Chochmah of the animal soul is busy figuring out how to make money, how to gain power, how to be in control, how to take care of its own needs, temptations, and desires. I'm not even getting into things that are prohibited. It includes that as well. That's what the animal soul is busy with. How do you weaken that? That's why I said, let's not talk theoretical here. Let's be practical. Yes. Every one of us has an animal soul. I'm sure if you think about it, especially we're going to Yom Kippur now, everybody's thinking about how to become a better person. We all have. We have our selfishness. We have our anger. We have our jealousies. We have many vices, right? We're depressed. All kinds of things that the animal soul affects us. And we have our desires. In the beginning of Tanya, he talks about the four negative elements: anger, arrogance, wasting time, frivolity, haughtiness, laziness. You know, the list goes on. We have plenty of things to deal with in our lives. All that is nefesh habamis stuff. How does the Torah deal with that? Firstly, by you becoming a Torah-dika person, which means you're studying Torah, you want to know what God wants of you, not what your animal soul wants, what God wants, to live up to your purpose in life, to your mission in life. That's called absorbing and assimilating Torah into your life. Not every one of us does it to a certain extent. Now, does that include the kissing of a Sefer Torah and dancing with it on Simchas Torah and hearing it when it's read on Shabbos, yeah, but that's just one part of it. That's not the main part of it. That's an important part. When we expose ourselves, and we, just like we don't go 3 days without drinking water, we don't go 3 days without hearing the Torah. But if you really want it to affect you, you could just go to synagogue and not even understand what it says. And it also could have an effect, but it could be very superficial and very non-sustainable. If you want Torah to affect you, you need to work on it. You need to integrate it. So all the above, Torah means everything. Every way we celebrate with Torah, whether it's studying Torah, whether it's reading Torah, whether it's listening to it, whether it's dancing with it, they're all part of it. But the big picture is that we are transformed. The more you get transformed by Torah into your life, the more the Nefesh Habamis is weakened. And if it remains makif or superficial, obviously the Nefesh Habamis is not really going to go away very quickly. So the more Torah-dik you become a Torah person. That instead of, like it says in Tanya, that your hand, instead of it being stretched out for your own needs, you stretch out to give tzedakah, because the Torah says you were blessed with a hand in order to give tzedakah. You use your intelligence. Instead of figuring out how to maneuver and manipulate someone, you figure out how to serve God better, how to understand God. Your chesed, instead of just showing kindness because you have some self-interest involved, you show kindness because God shows kindness. I mean, I go through all the parts of who we are. It's a transformational experience where Torah is becoming your guiding light. Like he's explaining here. That's why we are in the dark, and like the eyes need a light, the Torah serves as that guiding light. And furthermore, he's saying now, it connects us it weakens the animal soul, as well as connecting us to the bli gvul, the infinity of the divine, because when you learn Torah, it opens you up to the whole divine bigger picture, and Torah connects, and also the very experience with Torah. So even when we dance on Simchas Torah, it is a connection to the bli gvul of Torah, but it's a whole picture. When we say living a Torah life, it's not limited to any one specific thing. It's all the above, and even more than I mentioned.
Thank you. Yes, beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so might as well stop here. I thank you for the question. It's a good question and practical. And the key here is to make this practical, obviously. Okay. We'll stop here at the end of the paragraph on page 1405. Just to give you the lay of the land, he's going to continue to talk about how the neshama receives from Torah, and Torah, so to speak, empowers the soul to accomplish what it has to accomplish in this world and actualize as well. Then, I believe, as we continue, the next further down, he's going to start talking about how we are mashpia into Torah. Right now, we're the makabel. Torah is the main so-called imparting to us and empowering us. So here, Torah is what, like we spoke, the neshama comes down below. It's in a concealed state, and the Torah is illuminating and empowering it and everything we just learned. But we're going to soon learn how the neshamas in turn will empower Torah, will elevate a mishpia to Torah. But that's the second dimension. That's the second. And that's going to be the two parts of the eye. How the eye needs an outside light to illuminate so we should see in the dark. And then how the eye itself reaches the etzem koyach hariyah and becomes and it has light of its own, as well as being mashpia into Torah as well. Like we learned that the Chachamim have the power to reach even higher than Torah. Okay, so the picture is slowly emerging, and as we see, we'll come down to explaining and bringing everything together. Keep in mind, we're talking about Torah and how Torah is empowering the neshama. Ultimately, they work together to achieve exactly that goal, which is transforming this world and fulfilling its purpose. Yeah. In contrast to tefillah, which is much more of initiated from below, the soul praying to God, more from the gvul going to the bli gvul, whereas Torah is the bli gvul into the gvul. Put it in different terms. Okay, we'll stop here. page 1405. Are there any questions regarding the actual what we learned here? Or I can close this.